If ginger is so effective against migraines and the pain of menstrual cramps, what about osteoarthritis, an all-too common disorder that produces chronic pain and disability? The first major study, published in 2000, showed no benefit over placebo, but the study only lasted 3 weeks. The next, in 2001, lasted longer, 6 weeks, and was, by the end, indeed able to show significantly better results than placebo. But the placebo did so well, reducing pain from like 60s on a scale of 1 to 100 down to like 40s, that bringing pain down that extra little bit into the 30s was not especially clinically significant. And so an editorial in the official Journal of the American College of Rheumatology concluded that ginger should not be recommended for treatment of arthritis because of the limited efficacy. But since that time, there's been a few other trials that showed more impressive results, such that ginger is now considered indeed able to reduce pain and disability in osteoarthritis, but how well compared to other treatments? Since osteoarthritis is a chronic disease, it's especially important to weigh the risk versus benefit of treatment, and the commonly used anti-inflammatory drugs can carry serious cardiovascular and gastrointestinal risks. For example, if you stick cameras down people with osteoarthritis on drugs like ibuprofen, nearly half were found to have major injuries to the lining of their small intestines, 7 out of 16. Now, you can reduce that risk by taking an additional drug to counteract the side effects of the first drug. Ibuprofen-type drugs reduce our stomach lining's ability to protect itself from the stomach acid, so by blocking acid production with another drug, one can reduce the risk, but ginger can actually improve stomach lining protection. So ginger, at the kinds of doses used to treat osteoarthritis, a quarter to a half teaspoon a day, can be considered not just neutral on the stomach, but beneficial. So it can be as pain-relieving as ibuprofen, but without the risk of stomach ulcers. OK, but this sounded a little nutty to me. Topical ginger treatment, as in externally applying a ginger-soaked cloth or patch to the affected joint. There's a controlled study, compress versus patch, both showing remarkable and lasting pain relief for osteoarthritis sufferers. But what's missing? Right, a control group. There was no placebo patch. I don't care if ginger has been applied externally to painful joints for 1,000 years. The placebo effect has been shown to be remarkably effective in osteoarthritis to provide pain relief, and so until there's a controlled study on topical ginger, I'm not going to believe it. But there wasn't such a study until 20 men stuck ginger slices onto their scrotum. Men with inflamed testicles applied 6 to 10 paper-thin slices of ginger over the affected testes, and evidently the ginger group healed nearly 3 times faster. Unfortunately, the original source is in Chinese, so I can't get further details, as is the only other controlled study on topical ginger I could find. This evidently translates to evaluation of point plaster therapy with ginger powder and preventing nausea and vomiting during chemotherapy. Well, we know ginger powder taken orally can be a miracle against chemo-induced vomiting. What about stuffing it into your belly button? The external application of ginger powder, the so-called point of Schenck, which is the navel, while the control group got potato powder into their belly button, and lo and behold, the ginger group evidently had significantly less nausea and vomiting. Unfortunately, only the abstract is in English, so I can't tell how they effectively blinded the patients to the treatment. I mean, presumably it'd be easy to tell whether or not you were in the ginger or placebo group just by the smell, but maybe they controlled for that. Until we know more, I would suggest those who want to try ginger use it in their stomach rather than on their stomach. The German Medical Association finally just apologized for the profession's role in the Nazi atrocities, 65 years after 20 physicians stood trial in Nuremberg. During the trial, the Nazi doctors argued that their experiments were not unlike previous studies by researchers in the United States, like Dr. Strong's injection of prisoners with the plague. Nazi doctors were hung. Dr. Strong went on to chair a department at Harvard. And we were just getting started. The few examples the Nazis cited were nothing compared to what the American medical establishment started doing after Nuremberg. After all, prisoners are much cheaper than chimpanzees. Much attention has focused on our Cold War radiation experiments, which remained classified for decades. Declassification, the American Energy Commission warned, would have a very poor effect on the public, because they described experiments performed on human subjects, including the actual injection of plutonium into the body. Subjects like Mr. Cade, a 53-year-old colored male who got into a car accident and ended up in the hospital. Great, let's inject him with plutonium! Who else is powerless besides patients? How about kids? At the Fernald School for the Mentally Retarded in Waltham, Massachusetts, who were fed radioactive isotopes in their breakfast cereal. Tricks are for kids. Despite the Pentagon's insistence that these were the only feasible means of developing ways to protect people from radiation, researchers have since come up with a few ways that don't violate the Nuremberg Code, which states the only time doctors are allowed to do experiments that may kill or disable people if they themselves are willing to sign up to be experimental subjects as well. One way is to study cells in a petri dish. The protective effect of zingerone against radiation-induced genetic damage and cell death in human white blood cells. What is zingerone? It's a phytonutrient found in cooked ginger root. You blast cells with some gamma rays, and you get less DNA damage and fewer free radicals when you add ginger phytonutrients. They even compared it to the leading drug injected into people for radiation sickness, and found the ginger compound to be 150 times more powerful, and without the serious side effects of the drug itself. They conclude that it's an inexpensive natural product that may protect against radiation-induced damage. In fact, lots of different plant products have been found to be protective in vitro against radiation damage, by a whole variety of mechanisms. After all, plants have been utilized since time immemorial for curing diseases, so they started screening plants and also found radiation protective benefits from other plants one can find at grocery stores. Garlic, turmeric, goji berries, mint leaves. But this is all just on plants and cells in a test tube. Right? None had actually been tested on actual people until now. How are you going to find people exposed to radiation you can test stuff on? Well, aside from pilots, another group that suffers inordinate radiation exposure is the hospital workers that run the X-ray machines, who have been found to suffer chromosomal damage as a result compared to other hospital staff, and higher levels of oxidative stress within their bodies. Although X-rays can damage DNA directly, much of the damage is caused by the free radicals generated by the radiation. So they asked radiation staff to drink 2 cups a day of lemon balm tea for a month, an herbal tea known to have high levels of antioxidants, as I showed in one of my favorite videos, Antioxidants in a Pinch. So what happened? The level of antioxidant enzymes in their bloodstream went up, and the level of free radical damage went down, leading to the conclusion that oral administration of lemon balm tea may be helpful for the protection of the radiology staff against radiation-induced oxidative stress, an improved antioxidant defense system, especially enzymatic defense, due to its antioxidant properties. And if that's the reason, then practically any plant should fit the bill. So know that as you're sucking on some crystallized ginger to prevent travel sickness on some airplane, little did you know that you may be protecting yourself from the cosmic radiation at that altitude as well. Many successful herbal treatments start like this. Some doctor learns that some plant has been used by some ancient medical tradition, like ginger for headaches, and figures, hey, they've got patients with headaches, and since it's just some safe, common spice, advises one of their migraine patients to give it a try. At the first sign of a migraine coming on, the patient mixed a quarter teaspoon of powdered ginger in some water, drank it down, and poof! Within a half hour, the migraine went away. And it worked every time, no side effects. This is what's called a case report, which is really just a glorified anecdote, but case reports have played an important role in the history of medicine. AIDS was first discovered as a series of case reports. Some young guy walks into a clinic in Los Angeles with a bad case of thrush, and the rest is history. Or reports of an unusual side effect of a failed chest pain drug leading to the billion-dollar blockbuster Viagra. Case reports may be the lowest or weakest form of evidence, but they're often the first line of evidence. That's where everything begins. So a report like this isn't helpful in and of itself, but it can inspire researchers to put it to the test. The problem is, who's going to fund it? The market for migraine drugs is worth billions of dollars. A quarter teaspoon of powdered ginger costs about a penny. So who'd fund a study pitting ginger versus the leading migraine drug? No one. Until now. A double-blinded, randomized, controlled clinical trial comparing the efficacy of ginger to sumatriptan, also known as Imitrex, one of the top-selling billion-dollar drugs in the world, in the treatment of migraine headaches. They tried using just 1/8 of a teaspoon of powdered ginger versus a good dose of the drug, and they both worked just as well, just as fast. Most started out in moderate or severe pain before, but after the drug or ginger ended up mild or pain-free. The same proportion of migraine sufferers reported satisfaction with the results either way, and so as far as I'm concerned, ginger won. Not only because it's a few billion dollars cheaper, but because there were significantly fewer side effects in the ginger group. On the drug, people reported dizziness, a sedative effect, vertigo, and heartburn. The only thing reported for ginger was an upset tummy in about 1 in 25 people, though taking a whole tablespoon of ginger powder at one time on an empty stomach could irritate anyone's tummy, just as a note of caution. But sticking to 1/8 of a teaspoon is not only up to 3,000 times cheaper than the drug, but you're probably less likely to end up as a case report yourself, of people that have had a heart attack or died after taking the drug. Ginger is most famous for its role in preventing and alleviating nausea and vomiting, with so many studies now that there are reviews of reviews, not just in morning sickness, where just a half teaspoon of powdered ginger is associated with a 5-fold likelihood of improvement in nausea and vomiting in early pregnancy, but also for motion sickness, and post-operative nausea and vomiting after surgery, and preventing antiretroviral-induced nausea and vomiting during HIV treatment, and as a miracle against chemotherapy-induced vomiting. In this randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial of ginger for breast cancer chemo-induced vomiting was relieved in all phases, meaning in the acute phase within 24 hours of the chemo, delayed vomiting 2 to 3 days later, and even what's known as anticipatory vomiting, which occurs before chemotherapy sessions. After a few times, the body knows what's coming and starts throwing up even at the thought of it approaching. This anticipatory nausea is something drugs can't seem to control, even the fancy new anti-nausea drugs that can cost 10,000 times more than ginger, which comes in at about 2 pennies per dose, and in certain ways may work even better. I've also talked about ginger and pain. An 1/8 teaspoon of powdered ginger, 1 penny, found to work as well as the migraine headache drug Imitrex without the side effects. And speaking of pain, ginger may also be effective as ibuprofen for alleviating menstrual cramps. Painful periods are exceedingly common and can sometimes cause severe suffering, yet have been virtually ignored by pain management researchers and practitioners. But 4 randomized controlled trials have been published on ginger for menstrual pain, and all 4 showed significant benefit when taken just the first few days of your period. Effective doses range from about 1/3 of a teaspoon a day to a full teaspoon a day, but since they all seem to work about the same, might as well just start with a penny-a-day dose. And as a side benefit, it can dramatically reduce heavy flow, which is actually one of the most common gynecological problems for young women. We know that there are pro-inflammatory foods that may contribute to heavy menstrual bleeding, so how about trying an anti-inflammatory food like ginger? Heavy menstrual bleeding is defined as more than 1/3 of a cup, or 80 milliliters. All of the study subjects started out much higher than that, but just an 1/8 teaspoon of powdered ginger 3 times a day, starting the day before their period, cut their flow in half, and it seemed to work better each month they tried it, providing a highly effective, cheap, easy-to-use, safer treatment for menstrual blood loss and pain. So, works for migraines and menstrual cramps, but just because it's effective for many types of pain doesn't mean it's necessarily efficacious for all pain. For example, how about intestinal cramps? Is ginger effective for the treatment of irritable bowel syndrome? And the answer is yes, dropping IBS severity by over 25%, but so did the placebo. So the real answer is no. Ginger is not effective for the treatment of irritable bowel syndrome. Yet, ginger is one of the most commonly used herbal medicines for irritable bowel syndrome. Silly people! Don't they know it doesn't work any better than a sugar pill? Or, from another perspective, smart people using something that offers relief 53% of the time, and doesn't risk the adverse effects of some of the other drugs, with which doctors may harm one person for every 3 they help.